Hi there, I'm Aileen. In this video, I will be sharing one of my favorite picture books to teach rhythm, or ta and tt, otherwise known as quarter and eighth notes. This is Orange Pear, Apple Bear by Emily Gravett. If you love picture books as much as I do, or you've been trying to figure out how to use picture books more in your music lessons, then you are in the right place. Let's dive in. All right, so I'm going to start off by reading just a little bit of the book so you can kind of get an idea of the flow of the book and what the book is about. So it goes like this: orange, pear, apple, bear. Apple, pear, orange, bear. Orange, pear, apple, bear. Apple, orange, pear, bear. Orange, pear, apple, bear. Apple, bear, orange, pear. And you get the idea. So throughout the book, it's just different combinations of orange, pear, apple, and bear. And then it ends with apple, bear, there. So super fun and easy read, but also a great way to practice ta and tt. So I'm going to outline with you how I use this for ta and tt over the course of 7 different lessons, which we'll talk about how you could chunk that up a little bit differently. So before using this book, I would suggest that students know ta and tt, or quarter and eighth notes. So you could read the entire book to them and then discuss what the book is about, and then say, okay, we're going to read it one more time, but this time I want you to clap the rhythm of the words. So can everyone clap and say bear? And they do that. All right, what about apple? And they do that. What about pear? They do that. And then orange is a kind of a funny word because it depends on how you say it. Some people might say orange, some people might say orange. For the purposes of this book, I do have students say orange, but I actually do have a conversation with them about how orange could be said in different ways. But for today's lesson, let's say orange, right? So then, and you're not even worrying about like how many syllables are in each word yet necessarily, but you're just having them clap the rhythm. Can everyone say orange, pear? And they do that and they clap the rhythm, 2 fingers in their hand. Now can we say apple, bear? And they do that, right? So you go through the whole book having them clap the rhythm of all of the words. In the second lesson, you could say, oh, we read this book last time. We're going to read it again. But this time, and you might actually just like read a few pages having them clap the rhythm. And then you could say, okay, how many syllables are in the word pear? And they say 1. What rhythm do we know that's 1 syllable on a beat? Oh, ta. And I like to be careful to use the word syllables instead of sounds. So earlier in my career, I would say sounds, and I think this is a very common thing to do in the elementary music world, is to say how many sounds are in this. The issue is with reading with the word, well, yeah, I guess we could just use the word pear. If in their ELA lessons, when they're asked how many sounds are in pear, they're sounding out each sound. P, e, er, right? So the answer is not 1 sound, right? Same thing with apple. Apple, right? So I like to use the word syllable instead of sound. So with orange, what rhythm is 2 syllables on a beat? Oh, tt, that's right. So this would be tt, ta. Can everyone say tt, ta? And you go through the whole book and you have them figure out what each one is, which is pretty fun when you get to like the 4 beat ones here. And let's say this with words: apple, pear, orange, bear. Now can we say it with tts and tas? Tt, ta, tt, ta, and so on. So that's what I would do in lesson 2. In lesson 3, you can come back to this and review some of the tts and tas, and then say, okay, this time let's clap on all of the tts and snap for the tas. So if we were going to do apple, bear, it would be apple, bear, right? And they're figuring out, so this would be apple, pear, orange, bear, right? So they're adding some body percussion, and you could give them some choice there. Like you might say, okay, now instead of clapping and snapping, what else could we do? And then have them try that. And then you could have them create their own pattern. So like as a whole group, okay, right now this pattern is orange, pear, apple, bear. Can you think of a different pattern with any of these words? And maybe they say apple, bear, apple, they say orange, orange, pear, bear, or something like that, right? So you can have them come up with their own patterns using any of these words. All right, and then in lesson 4, you can have them work in small groups. And in small groups, they try to figure out which words they're going to use to create their own pattern. So maybe one group comes up with pear, pear, apple, bear, and another group comes up with bear, bear, apple, pear, or whatever, right? In the 5th lesson, I actually have a worksheet that I use where, again, we're working in small groups, but they're actually writing down their pattern. So they're writing it down with words, and then they're writing it down with TTs and TAs. Then in lesson 6, they could continue to work with a small group to create their pattern. Maybe they finished their pattern up. Maybe they didn't completely finish in the first lesson, so they finish it in that second lesson. And then they can combine with another group to create an 8-beat pattern. So maybe one group has orange, pear, orange, pear, and then another group has apple, apple, pear, bear, and then they try that entire 8 beats all together from left to right. So they could actually put their worksheets like side by side with each other and say all 8 beats. Okay, we're getting close to being done with all of the lessons. In this last lesson, again, you could hand them back their worksheets, they get into their small groups, and then they could choose whatever non-pitch percussion instruments they want to play with their pattern, and then they perform it. So maybe they decide that every time there's a word orange, they play something like rhythm sticks. So every time there's orange, orange, they're going to play it on rhythm sticks. Maybe for pear, they decide, and this is totally up to them, maybe on pear, they play the hand drum. Maybe on bear, they play the maracas or something like that, right? So they're making the decisions about which instruments they're playing and when. And again, they could just work with their small group with their 4-beat composition, or they could pair up with another group to make an 8-beat composition. And then they could perform for the class. So, we would love to hear your pattern, and they go ahead and perform it. And then we practice our audience etiquette and applauding for each group. Who else would like to perform? And you have another group perform, and so on. So I talked about how you could spread this out over 7 lessons, because the idea is you're not doing this for the entire lesson. With this setup, it might be like 5 minutes of one lesson, 10 minutes of another. With the composition, maybe 15 minutes in that lesson, right? So you're kind of chunking it up. I really like to do that because I think just continuing to go back to an activity, like they don't get tired of it because you're just doing a few minutes at a time instead of doing it for the entire lesson. But those of you who like to plan where this is the entire lesson, you could also do it that way as well. So maybe this could be an entire lesson, and maybe you don't get totally finished in that lesson and it bleeds over into another lesson. So you could do that too. It really depends on your teaching style as well as your students. All right, so if you're like, okay, great, I want to try this, but I don't remember all of the steps, I do have an orange, pear, apple, bear lesson plan where everything is written out, as well as the worksheet that I talked about that you can get for free simply by clicking the link below and giving me your email address, and then you will go ahead and get the lesson plan as well as the worksheet. I will also link to this book below so that you can purchase it for your classroom if you'd like. You could also check your school library to see if they might have it, or your local library. And I just want to also mention that if you love learning ideas about the elementary music classroom, I have a website called aileen'smusicroom.com. I have a blog there, and I also have a podcast called The Music Room, so I would love for you to check that out. You can find me on Facebook. I have a Facebook page called Aileen's Music Room, as well as a Facebook group called The Music Room with Aileen Miracle. I have an Instagram at Aileen's_music_room, and a TikTok at Aileen's Music Room. And I am often sharing ideas about picture books and puppets and any other activities that you love to do with your own students. All right, so thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.